this. Now, look, they're right there in the nation's capital. They are right there where you would think all of this stuff would be, part of the discussion. Most of the people had never even heard of the case, had no idea what it was about, and when you explained what it was, said, well, that's not right. That's stupid. That's going to be disruptive. That's going to be dangerous. That's going to harm working people. The folks on the street, the average person on the street, grab anyone to a person was against it. Only the right-wing ideologues, of which, unfortunately, I didn't bump into, only they are the ones who understand the political part of this. This isn't about good governance. This isn't about good society. This isn't about strong families. This isn't about any of that stuff. What this is about is pure Machiavellian politics, taking your enemy in public and goring them in front of everyone else. So no one has the audacity to dare challenge your power. That's what we're seeing coming out of the Supreme Court. Because, look, I think everybody is in agreement that this decision is going to be a 5-4 decision that is going to overturn 40 years of decided law. It is going to turn the public sector labor movement on its head. And look, we don't know what's going to happen after. There are some who are saying this is going to be a good thing. It's going to make us stronger, more militant, which I'm hoping is true. And then there are going to be others who are going to go look at Wisconsin, where immediately they lost half of the revenue coming into the unions and half of their ability to bargain and enforce their contracts and all of the other stuff that Walker did, which is coming, by the way. This Supreme Court case is only one part of the no rights at work agenda. And here again, this has been going on for decades. This march towards destroying the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. This has been going on for at least 40 years, realistically more like 60. You go back to the William F. Buckley in the 50s and the whole push towards conservatism and the John Birch Society and all of the anti-worker groups that were just saying, hey, our robber barons need their power back. You go to the 1971 treatise on how to save free enterprise, written by Lewis Powell, and you look at how, and I've said this before, you truly have to be in awe at the level of commitment that the wealth class of this country has had at destroying the American working class. And this case today is the culmination of a large portion of that work. The question that I keep coming back to is, when do we say enough? Because I guess the reason I'm passionate about this is when I grew up as a kid, where I grew up as a kid, when you saw people get a union job, you saw their lives get better immediately. When you saw my neighbor, for instance, she had 4 kids, and her boyfriend got a job working at Ford. And immediately their lives got better. They had food at the end of the month. There wasn't, the scrounging where the cupboards are empty and even the rats are going, hey, what about us? They got used bicycles. They had better clothing. They had, eventually a used car. And then eventually they moved, across the street into some of the housing that wasn't the projects, but was some of the standalone housing in the quote unquote better neighborhood, which was just across the street. Their lives got better though. And it was because of those union jobs. Because understand, those jobs at Ford and at Chevy and the factories that were surrounded this area, those were not great jobs in the 20s and 30s. Those were not the family sustaining jobs of the past. It was only when they became union jobs did they become family-sustaining, life-changing jobs. Made their lives worlds better. Moved them out of poverty, gave their kids an opportunity at a better future. And that was the stepping stone for every generation. I look at my grandparents. When my grandfather and my grandmother were married, they were basically homeless. He had gotten back from the military, and they got married, and she was out on father didn't like son-in-law and threw her out, and they were literally living in their car. And over the years, my grandfather, got one crummy job after another, shoveling. The first job he told me he had was shoveling coal off the back of a coal truck. 10, 12, 15 hours a day for 17 cents an hour. The New Deal brought along a 25-cent minimum wage. His life got better. They joined a union. Things got better. Wages went up. Conditions got easier. Hours got shorter. Health benefits came along. Retirement security. And by the time he worked his entire life, by the time he retired, he had a Teamster pension that he collected until he passed away, and then half of that was passed on to my grandmother until she passed away. They had health care all the way through their lives, and the kind that, not that you had to like today go, oh, I got these deductibles. No, they said, here's my card. Take care of my kid. And they had dignity and respect and security in old age and work. And this is the kind of stuff that generation wanted to pass down to the rest of us. They wanted to pass down to their children. They wanted better for the next generation. I think back to, a conversation I had with him, when I was in high school. He said, look, if you end up driving a truck for a living, you're going to be a failure because I want you to be better than I was. You're to go on farther and to do more. And I think that has played out in every generation since, to the point, and this is the angering part of this, to the point to where we don't actually respect work anymore. I think my generation was the first that was told, no matter what, you have to go to college, you have to get a degree, or you're going to live in poverty and you're going to work in poverty. The key, the ticket to the middle class is that degree. And anything else below that is unacceptable and is a failure. And I think what happened is my generation, along with my parents' generation, look at actual work with out of the corner of their eye. Like it's something to look down on. And not demanding the kind of respect that, my grandfather's generation demanded. It didn't matter what you did. It didn't matter what work you did for a living. It should be respected. It should be compensated, and you should have security, not just in your day-to-day lives, but in health and in retirement. That's where we need to go back to. And the conversation today, and look, you can look at, every different news outlet. It's always something well beyond what I think is important. The anger, the frustration in all of this is that I don't know that we respect work anymore. And with that comes the respect and dignity of a living wage. And that is brought by having the ability to collectively bargain. And I'm not saying that, people with college degrees are doing great because, hey, look at the numbers. They're not. And I would argue they need unions just as much as anyone else, if not more. Because we've been sold this bill of goods for, my entire lifetime. This whole Horatio Alger version of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and if you don't have bootstraps, whittle them out of a pure intestinal fortitude. And only you can be the driver of your destiny, and, all of that nonsense. The self-made millionaire, which there are a number of them. But the reality is most working people don't get to that point. And they work just as hard, they struggle as much, and they just don't reach that level. So we got lots of things to talk about. The question is once this decision happens, and I think everyone expects it to be sometime in June, I'm expecting it to be the very last thing that the Supreme Court lets out before they bolt out of town for the session. So I'm expecting sometime in June. Might as well ruin the summer. The question becomes, what is going to happen? How do you deal with that? What's the response going to be? You go back to 1981 when Reagan fired the Patco workers. The response, I don't think, was sufficient. What is going to be the response to this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Fred Call is going to be here. He's the president of the United University Professions. They are the largest public higher education union in the country. Going to give some of his thoughts. He was actually in the courtroom today, going to get some of the thoughts on the arguments, some of the thoughts on, well, what he saw, what he heard, and maybe where things could go. Because, hey, I'm told there's an outside shot that maybe, possibly, it doesn't go the wrong way. I'm not buying it. Quick break. Right back.
Look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That was the day the Battle at Bethlehem began. 14,000 workers at Bethlehem Steel's Lackawanna Mill in Buffalo, New York, walked out on strike. The Steelworkers Organizing Committee, or SWOC, had been fighting to organize Little Steel for years. Little Steel was a general term that referred to the smaller mills like Republic, Inland, Bethlehem, and Youngstown Sheet and Tube. At Bethlehem, SWOC was still waiting for a decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals about the company union Bethlehem refused to give up in defiance of the Wagner Act. As a defense industry, Bethlehem had $1.5 billion worth of armament orders to fill, and yet they wouldn't even pay the legal minimum wage mandated for government contracts. Retired steelworker Mitchell Schaefer recalled in a 1991 interview, "I went to work there in the late 30s, swinging a 20-pound sledgehammer to break iron billets." The 81-year-old continued by saying, "I got 40 cents an hour, 6 days a week, no vacations." The last straw came when Bethlehem fired over 1,000 workers. Bethlehem claimed these particular workers damaged coke ovens when they engaged in a work stoppage. Workers immediately formed solid picket lines at 7 gates that stretched 2 miles. They successfully beat back attempts by police to allow scabs to cross their picket line. After 38 hours, Bethlehem quickly agreed to reinstate the 1,000 workers. They soon resumed talks regarding wage increases, grievance procedures, and union recognition. But a month later, Bethlehem decided to go back on their promises. They started organizing elections for collective bargaining representatives through their company union. The stage was set for the next big strike at Bethlehem in March that would finally win union recognition.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
In Wisconsin, they're standing in the snow, wondering where the work is gonna go. In Wisconsin, in the middle of the night, Governor Walker legislated away their rights.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. It was 7 years ago today that we were marching in the streets of Madison, Wisconsin against Act 10 and what the Republicans there with Scott Walker rammed through in the middle of the night, and literally in the middle of the night. And I always tell the story of the poor girl who was there for the 10 days before that when we were there, who slept right through the entire thing at 2 o'clock in the morning. But again, like thieves in the night. And as I said when I came back from Wisconsin, I said to my friends in Pennsylvania, look, all of the horrible stuff that you saw going on in Wisconsin, it's going to make its way here. It will go across the country. The whole no rights at work agenda is front and center. Get ready. And I don't know that they listened. I don't know that we're ready. And today, as we saw the Supreme Court heard oral arguments, and here to give us a little thought on what was going on in the courtroom and maybe share some thoughts on the hearing, I've asked Fred Kowal to come talk with us. He's the president of United University Professions. They are the largest public higher education union in the nation. Fred, thanks for taking time for us.
Sure, anytime, Jim. Thanks.
So you sat in the courtroom today. Is that what I get?
No, actually, I was outside with the real folks, raising hell and being heard, but at the same time was in touch with folks who were on the inside. So I got pretty good clarity on what transpired in there.
All right. So give me the short rundown. What do we think of the hearing?
Well, I think it's pretty much going as expected. it's disturbing on so many levels because Kennedy led the way. He kind of paints himself as this moderate swing justice, much along the lines of Sandra Day O'Connor. But Sandra Day O'Connor actually, was moderate at times. Kennedy hasn't done that. And today he led the charge. He was unrelenting in attacking unions and public sector unions, top to bottom. It's pretty clear where he stands on this case. More than that, he made very well, and that's the impression I left with, and others did, that he may very well have already written the opinion for the majority, and it's just a matter of whether they all sign on to it or they want to do concurrent opinions. It was disappointing for those of us who still held out hope that there would be some sanity in the Supreme Court with respect to worker rights. But no, we lost that chance when the Republican Party tore up the Constitution 2 years ago and didn't even give a hearing to Merrick Garland.
Yeah, I mean, the stolen Supreme Court just on this day it looms large.
Yes.
I've been saying for a while this case was already decided. The second that Trump appointed or nominated Gorsuch, and the Supreme Court or the Senate confirmed him, to me it was a done deal. And the question then became where do we go from the end of this decision? What's the next step? Because look, I point back to the Patco year, 1981. I being just a kid at the time, remember that my thought is there should be something to this. There should be some national outrage, because we now look back and go, that was the shot heard across the boardroom that really, led to a lot of the assaults on organized labor. This time, I mean, we have hindsight. What do you think the response is going to be now?
Well, I can say that it's kind of curious. When we just go back a couple of years to the Friedrichs case, first Harris v. Quinn a couple of years before that, that was kind of, an alarm bell. When Friedrichs hit, what I saw in a lot of unions was alarm and the rumblings in the public sector saying, "Hey, we got to get more members mobilized and not just depend on fair share payments." But I think that there wasn't I use the word desperation that I see now, where and I mean we collectively in the public sector unions, whether it's AFSCME or my own union, AFT, NEA, there's a lot of work going on mobilizing and activating members. This time, I think the attitude is much more, phrase I use is we're behaving or thinking beyond Janus. That Janus is happening, okay?
Right.
It's a given, as you were saying. It's a given. So whenever it comes down, doesn't make any difference. What we got to be about is organizing and mobilizing before, during, and after, forever. This is our new reality. We have to constantly fight to keep our members committed to the unions, and then more than that, grow the workers' movement. I think, this is a wake-up call for unions, that we've got to think in terms of the working class, not just in terms of building organizations, but, really building that class consciousness between labor, that we've got to stand together in solidarity and look out for each other, whether workers are unionized or not. That's the only way we get past, the horrible things that happened in November 2 years ago, where far too many workers, fell under the delusionary words of Donald Trump that somehow this so-called billionaire developer knew what workers needed. We got to work on waking people up, and this is the fight going forward.
Yeah, I've been saying for a while, I think the reality is before things get better, it's going to have to get a whole hell of a lot worse. And we're going to have to return to the roots of the old days of, that the kind of, the injury to one being an injury to all. And that kind of class consciousness that I think, over the last, 30, 40 years, the labor movement is kind of lost as we've moved towards a more business friendly kind of movement.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of public sector unions, that's been the case. I saw it in my union. I've been president for 4.5 years now, going on 5. And, I've been pounding the drum about how, we have to have a stronger union ethic. And look, I represent professors and doctors and professionals, and sometimes they're folks who don't really want to see themselves as unionists and as labor. And the fact is, you sign the back of the check, not the front, you're labor. And get used to it and take pride in it. We're doing work. And, I think that's an important thing that folks have to wake up to, is that class consciousness.
Yeah, not just doing work, though, Fred. I mean,
No.
creating wealth for the wealth class to be able to absorb. And I mean, the war between capital and labor is eternal. And understanding which side of that divide you are on, answering that question, which side are you on, I think is right now at this moment extremely important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that one of our biggest enemies, and it's always been this way for the working class and the middle class, is that we lose track of we get a false class consciousness, and I think that's been one of the problems I've seen, where there's way too much talk about, by political folks talking about the middle class all the time. We got to use the phrase working class and labor, because the idea that middle class is somehow maybe a little bit higher than the working class, we're not. We are workers. We're labor, and we're the 99%, and we do produce all the wealth that they skim a big chunk out of, and that consciousness has got to be embraced, and it's got to be within us, with every day we work.
No, I mean, you got to wake up every day and fight the fight. And this is where, there's part of me that is somewhat optimistic, but my fear becomes, and maybe you can address this better than I can, but my fear is that you have now the public sector unions, and a lot of, public sector workers are in just about all of the private sector unions as well. They become insular, and it's only about, really becoming about their own members, just as the right wing has painted them, that they're, self-serving and that they're only about their members, that they become what they're being accused of. And then the outside organizing stops. And as time goes on, the attrition happens, and, they die that way.
Yeah. And I think, that's what's put, a lot of unions, my own included, in a bind where we've got to do aggressive internal organizing. But, for us, one of our big issues, and it's a justice issue, it's the incredibly exploitive salaries that are paid to adjunct faculty, part-time faculty, which are a bigger and bigger percentage of the teaching going on in higher ed. And we got to organize them internally, but we've also got to go out there and organize them in other areas of higher education. And building on that, the movement, the fight for 15 has got to be carried on. Like you said, unions have got to be seen as, as the vanguard. Okay, we're the ones who are bringing about the justice and the class consciousness and the justice that all labor seeks and deserves. That's the way we've got to operate.
Yeah, I mean, what's going on in our colleges and universities right now is nothing short of disgraceful, especially when you look at the dynamics of we're saddling a generation with massive debt, and we're also screwing the people who are providing that education by paying them poverty wages. And I keep going, where's all this money going? I mean, I know endowments are huge right now, and I know the administrative staff folks are making money hand over fist. But at some point you got to go. There's got to be a reason for this. There's got to be.
Yeah, we see it in the public universities. And State University of New York is where our folks are working, and we see that they admit it. They say, "Oh, well, our revenue stream is strong and our reserves are strong." Yeah, we know that. They're doing exceptionally well, and just in the last couple of weeks, news stories came out about the salaries. The top 50 salaries in upstate New York, and 47 out of the 50 of them were administration officials from the state university across different campuses. It's just absurd. We're without a contract. We've fight for a contract for over a year and a half now. And meanwhile, we're seeing what these folks are getting, and it's absurd. And it's, as you said, it's got nothing to do with education. Instead, what it does is it leaves our students with just incredible debt. It's a massive redistribution of wealth again.
Yeah. But here's the thing, and I want to come back to this Janus case because
Yeah.
it's my fear, it's my belief that the vast majority of people in our society know nothing about it. They have no clue of what it's going to do until it's already done. I mean, I scanned most of the major news networks. I've scanned most of the major publications, and there's nothing on their websites. There's nothing to be found about this at all, and it's been kind of radio silence for the mainstream media. How do we begin to get this out and to to explain to non-members and members alike what exactly has happened, because their lives are going to get worse. Their wages are going to go down. Their benefits are going to continually slide. Their pensions are going to continue to evaporate. How do we make that narrative again and make sure that folks understand it?
Yeah, I think that best way to do it is, you really can get lost in, the intricacies of the law. And then the other side, of course, is very clever. They're putting this out as a workers' rights issue, freedom of choice, and all that. And what we have to talk about is what this about is just another step, over the past 25, 30 years where you have had this consistent pattern of the loss or at best stagnancy of wages and benefits for working folks, while the salaries for top folks are going through the roof. And that what's going on here is the Supreme Court, just like Congress and the executive branch, president, these are really pawns of the wealthiest in society. And the court is being used just as the other branches of government by the Koch brothers and their ilk to get more. That's what this is. This is class warfare, and it's got to be presented that way. They hide behind their words, but what it comes down to is it's class warfare.
Yeah.
And if we don't defend ourselves and each other, we're going to be destroyed.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think Warren Buffett said it best. He said it's class warfare and my class is winning, but they shouldn't be. Because at the end of this, we've outprocreated them. They may have all the money, and for the short term, we still have the right to vote. That's why I think 2018 is so important.
Absolutely. And one of the things that gets lost in all this, and it just, it kind of baffles me on the conservative side, unions have been throughout history, and sometimes to our own detriment, moderate factors. And that is, basically winning enough for the working class so that there isn't an uprising, there isn't, revolution. And I think that gets lost on the elite. They think they make these short-term gains and they crush unions and they crush the working class. Well, eventually the working class, we will reach a point where can we turn? Okay. And without unions to argue on our behalf and to defend our rights and our interests, then where do we turn? And that's what concerns me with the whole Trump phenomenon. Is you've got a sector of the working class that's angry. They put their trust in this con man, and he's not going to do anything for them. He's going to make the situation worse. Then what happens? Where does that race go? Warren Buffett was right. Yeah, they're winning, but in the long run, what will happen?
Yeah. No, I've often said, Fred, the reality is the only way that all of these attacks turn around, this whole no rights at work agenda turns around, is when the wealth class believes that their head could end up on a platter. And that is, I know a lot of people say, oh, that's unconscionable, could never happen here. Guess what? It could if things get desperate enough. And if you see us returning to the days of the 1930s.
Right, and that was one of the reasons why we got all the great labor legislation in the 1930s.
Yep.
Roosevelt was smart enough to realize that his wealthy friends were going to lose out in the end. In the worst way possible.
Maybe we need to relive those days. Last question I've got for you. I want to get your thoughts on something that just kind of makes me chuckle today. I don't know if you know who the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia is, a guy named Casey Cagle. Today he tweeted out that he will kill any legislation that benefits Delta unless the company changes its position and fully reinstates its relationship with the NRA. He says corporations cannot attack conservatives and expect us not to fight back. Do you find it ironic that on the day that the Supreme Court is going to use its power as a bludgeon over the head of workers, that the lieutenant governor of Georgia is talking about using the government as a bludgeon over the head of corporations?
Yeah, especially because I thought corporations were people and had freedom of speech. Exercised whether with money or with their decisions. This, by the way, is the kind of unintended consequences in the Janus decision. As a stockholder, as someone who has a pension, I'm a public employee. Obviously, I don't want them spending my money in ways that I don't agree with. So this is real. There's a lot of unintended consequences, but that's just hilarious. But that's how the extremists in the right wing are. They pay no attention to their own contradictions.
I just had to chuckle. But Fred, I appreciate the time. I'd like to have you come back and talk to us again. Keep this going, because I think this is such an important topic that we need to continue on with it.
Is.
Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, Jim.
Good stuff. Fred Kowal, he is the president of the United University Professions. They are the largest public higher ed union in the country. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Now the lessons of the past we'll all learn with workers' blood. The mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farms. Now the lessons of the past we'll all learn with workers' blood. The mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands and trenches full of mud. War has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on! The union forever defending the rights. Let's fight the right wing, our workers unite. With our brothers and our sisters from many far-off lands. There is power.
Yes, indeed. There is power in a union. And we saw that on Saturday as workers from across D.C., across Philadelphia, across cities all across the country came out to show their union pride and stand up against what is happening today, or what has happened today in the U.S. Supreme Court, the Janus versus AFSCME case. And look, 7 years ago today, we were in Madison, Wisconsin, in the snow and in the cold with 100,000 plus union workers, citizens, concerned folks going, hey, stop the attacks on workers. And the sad reality is here we are after 7 years, after 40 years of right-wing attacks. And the questions become, where do we go from here? And that's why I've asked Congressman Donald Norquist to come talk with us. He's a representative from New Jersey's 1st Congressional District. Congressman, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for asking me to be on here. It's good to be home, as I say.
So let me ask you, today the hearing happened. What were your impressions?
Well, a year ago, we were at Supreme Court with a case very similar. It was to Friedrichs versus California teachers. And I watched that go on, and it was mixed. And then, as we all know, it came out tied with the death of Justice Scalia. So here we are today, a little bit warmer out. We're going in, but essentially the same issue. Janus is about the issue of whether or not those non-members have to pay agency fees. But the real issue is trying to destroy unions. That's the basis for what we were there about. They're trying to knock out the public sector employees from being part of a collective bargaining agreement.
Well, and I would say it's even more than that. It's about destroying a working class voice in what happens in the halls of power and what controls happen in this country. And I know the right wing loves to focus on its freedom and its liberty. And we've seen this movie before. It's all a way of making a desperate working class and a pliable working class.
There's no question about it. I started my career as an apprentice electrician 37 years ago with the IBEW. I enjoyed working with my hands. I loved the job. So I became a journeyman, a foreman. I moved into the office and worked for the union. In fact, Rick, I'm the first business agent ever elected to Congress. Now, how bad is that it took that long to get the voice of working men and women into the House of Congress? It's unreal. But what we see each and every day are these attacks. This one's over at the Supreme Court, but I sit on the labor and education, and those attacks have started from day one. The record-keeping rule on OSHA, undermining overtime, silica standards, the list goes on. Knocking out prevailing wage and project labor agreements. It is a fight every day, and we're fighting with those who are well-financed and organized.
Yeah.
They're well-financed by the big dollar guys that we always hear.
And I often say, they want to take us back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s and not the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah. Well, certainly remember when air traffic controllers got crushed. That was certainly a turning point. But it's also the turning point when they started to destroy the pensions. And that Frank Borman and the Eastern Airline guys, when they first started crushing those defined benefit plans that have given people the dignity of retiring with the resources they need to live.
Yeah.
And now that's under attack.
No, it's all under attack. But here's the thing, and I keep asking the question as an observer, when does enough? I mean, you mentioned the Patco situation with Reagan firing the Patco workers. As a kid back then, I'm going, why aren't we all in the streets? Why aren't we shutting the country down like France or some of those countries? When does it become, it's finally you have no choice but to take to the streets and shut it down?
Listen, on any given day, it's trying to get the focus on working men and women, what's important to them.
Right.
And that starts when? During the election, right? The fact is we need more people who have working backgrounds to come here. There's 211 attorneys in Congress. There's only one electrician, one carpenter, one painter, and one iron worker. I don't think that's enough from those who get up each and every day and keep America running. We need more people to run for those offices against the people who literally come here every day trying to crush the working families.
Why isn't that a message we hear more often? I mean, this Janus case, I don't think has gotten enough attention in our media, because I would argue our media is owned by a bunch of corporations who would love to see a desperate working class. But, why don't we see more of this? I mean, I got to be honest. I talk to people on the streets every day and I go, hey, have you heard of this? Do you know what this is about? And I'm literally stunned at how little the average everyday working person understands how this case is going to affect all of us. Because at the end of it, this is yet one more of attacks, one more arrow in the back, one more stab, if you will. But this is a pretty big one in my view.
Oh, this is huge. But let's talk about it. Most people, I would argue nearly everybody, understands how important nurses are, firefighters, police, EMS. They know that. If they understood what Janus would mean to the people who try to save their lives, I think we would get a little bit different reaction. Yeah. But you know what? They're too busy working two jobs today, which 50 years ago, one job would be able to do it.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I think back to my grandparents' generation, and my grandfather was one of those guys who fought the fights to build, a union. He was a Teamster for, 20 plus years of his working career. And, because, he went from making like 7-8 cents an hour up to when he retired, he had the dignity of a defined benefit pension. He had health care. In his lifetime, they went from extreme poverty of the Depression era to leading a very solid American dream-esque middle-class existence, and finished his life with dignity and respect in his home without wanting for anything. And I think the average American person wants that for themselves Yet what we're seeing coming out, these attacks after attacks on defined benefits, on reasonable wages, on Social Security, on Medicare, Medicaid, you name it, all of this stuff is destroying that dream that I argue the greatest generation built for us.
Unions brought you the weekend. Unions brought you that you can't work kids under the age of 12 and under the age of 16. This is an ongoing issue.
Yeah,
and
but
I
Congressman,
might suggest,
that was 100 years ago. We don't need those anymore. We're better than that now. Isn't that
yeah?
what we hear?
Yeah. Well, listen, every kid, you hear it from the time you're born to the time you get out of high school. The only way to make it in America is to go to college. I started as an electrician. 70% people don't have 4-year degrees.
Right.
We have great jobs. We have the dignity of working with our hands. People look down on that as society because, you got to go to college to be something. So the guy who drives a truck, who works in a warehouse, who's a carpenter, is something less than, which is BS. I love my job, and so do those people. But when you keep putting them down, taking away their health care, taking away their retirement, this is where our country is headed because of one thing. The big dollars by the billionaires on the other side taking care of this.
It's the greed.
They control the media. They control the message.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it is the greed. So let's go back to this case today. I think all of us, I think maybe you'll agree or disagree. I think all of us believe this case was decided even before it was heard. I believe Neil Gorsuch, the fifth vote in the stolen seat, is going to cast that deciding vote. Where do you go from, I guess first, do you believe that to be the case? And secondly, if it does become law, where do we go from here?
Well, let's start out. I sat in the case today and I listened to it being argued, and I came out more optimistic than I went in. Does that mean it's not going to change? Because this is overturning close to 60 years of precedent in labor. It literally dumps the apple cart.
Yeah, so much for
those
decided
working
law.
Men and women. Absolutely. So my first prayer is I hope we're able to sustain it. But if not, this is going to put any union that has public employees back on the ropes. But by the same token, when they do that, you know what happens when you put people in the corner? They fight harder. So I believe, come next election season, because that's how we change it. We change the Congress. I know everybody always hears it, but if they sat in and day out and saw the attacks on working families, just look at the tax bill. How bad do you have to get screwed to understand what just happened? Literally billions of dollars to the top half of 1% of America.
Yeah, but Congressman,
I'm sorry.
But Congressman, I got a $1.50 a week raise. I can now get my membership to Costco.
Yeah, you might be able to afford a cup of coffee from Starbucks on that. Really? And Berkshire Hathaway, $29 billion. $29 billion, and you got $1.50. Really? Anybody thinks that's fair?
No, it's not fair. But, the thing is the thing that gets me is, you look at every workplace in this country where, everybody I know is paying more and more for health care. In fact, the one guy I talked to, he makes $50,000 a year driving a truck for a small company. And for him and his family to get health care, it would cost them $24,000 a year. And you go, how does that make any sense whatsoever? And it doesn't. I mean, every one of these issues, and I keep asking, when is the working class today going to do what my grandparents' generation did? And that is take to the shop floor and fight for those better wages, hours, and conditions, and say, we're not putting up with this you-know-what anymore. It's done. Especially when you see the report that came out. I just read a story this morning that said that, the CEOs are worried what their workforce is going to think once they finally have to report how much more they're actually making, 200-300 times what the average worker is making. I mean, when do we go, hey, wake up?
Well, they're so scared of their jobs, so many women, men and women, and you know that, they want to make sure that their kids have this opportunity. My dad used to take me up picket lines when I was a kid. I've taken my kids up picket lines. But again, the rules have been changed the way the picket lines work. They put you on an isolated gate in the back around where nobody can see you. I mean, those are little things, but they all add up to the ability for men and women to collectively come together and bargain. That's where this problem starts. And it's aided by those in Congress who don't have the spine to say, you know what, let's level the playing field. It really, really gets to me when we see something like the rollback of the OSHA rule. Simply said, if guys are dying on your job, you have to report it when you bid a job. We had almost every member of the Republican Party vote for that. So you don't have to report that you've killed people in your job. Are you kidding me? They actually voted on this.
Well, I got to be honest. I've said for years, if I really wanted to kill you, Congressman, I'd just hire you and give you a job because we can kill people and get away with it.
Yeah, you saw the budget come out, 21% cut from the Department of Labor. Those are the people who protect lives each and every day. I was on a job as an electrician, unfortunately, 3 times where somebody died. You never forget that you should be able to come home the way you went to work.
Yeah.
And these were industrial accidents that made such an impression on me that I keep with me today. That's the people I remember when I'm down voting on these things. See somebody killed in front of your eyes because of something that was done wrong. And that will make an impression you'll never forget.
Yeah, it does stick with you. I've known people who have died on the job, and it, even to this day, you carry with it. So let me ask you then, Congressman, last line of questioning and moving this around to where do we go? Because I today 7 years ago we were marching in Wisconsin. I think one of the biggest failures of the Obama administration was not to address our labor issues. He ran on in 2008 that he was going to be the champion of labor. He didn't choke on the word union. And yet the first piece of legislation he chose, I argue, was the political over the practical, where I believe the Employee Free Choice Act or something much, much better should have been the first piece of legislation. We went with the political and never got around to something as simple and as weak, I argue, as the Employee Free Choice Act. What do Democrats do? I mean, I think the last election, a lot of union members voted for Republicans out of frustration. Where do you and the Democrats do? Where do you go? How do you pursue and fix this?
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. Many people in labor, there was a big argument on whether the Free Choice Act was good enough. Well, we know what happened here, and we've seen what's happened from there. I was a business agent in southern New Jersey for the electricians, and I dealt with Donald Trump's organizations for 17 years. And what I saw as an agent, as an electrician, is when he built the Taj Mahal, at the time, the most expensive casino in the world, almost $1 billion back then. And then right before they opened, he went bankrupt and literally turned the lives of those working men and women overnight. Lost their jobs, lost their businesses, made a horrible impact. And now we elected him. Why? Because people are desperate. They want to make sure that they have a job, that they can take care of their loved ones. So it was frustration. If you're a coal miner, the perception was we're trying to kill you. That somehow Democrats at times care more about the trees than they do people. That's the perception that the corporate entities are driving on Congress. They hear me. They hear people that I serve with. I know they go to work every day trying to make sure that those working families get a fair shake. And that's what drives me each and every day. If I'm not here to advance the cause of working men and women, I don't need to be here. But that only changes at Election Day. And your voice is your vote, and you got to do it, or we're going to get crushed.
I agree. But here's the thing. I mean, people want hope. They want vision. They want, something concrete to go, this is what we're fighting for. And this is where I think, the Democrats have kind of fallen down on the job. They've kind of been the resistance, if you will, the opposition to Trump, but not really, in my view, or maybe I'm wrong and you can help me with it. Not really pushing this is what we're going to do. Where's the speech? Every a chicken in every pot, a car in every driveway. Where's the kind of vision for tomorrow? Rights on the job for everyone. Where's that at?
Hey, everything I say from the day I first put my hand on the Bible and sworn in, it's about jobs, a good job you can take care of your family. Do you know it's been over a decade since the minimum wage was voted on in Congress?
Yep.
A decade. Tell me how you give the literally $1.5 trillion away to that top 1%, but it's still $7.20 an hour in most of America, and 10 years since we voted on it. Tell me how in anybody's book that's fair. Yeah, I get pissed off when I start thinking about these things, and that's what drives me. Education, jobs, education, and making sure we have a secure place to live. That's been the focus since day one.
Yep.
And we have plenty of Democrats here, but not enough who believe in that. That's why this election coming up literally will help change the course of time.
I agree. But the final thing I want to point out is every job could be a good job if it were a union job. And I look at my grandparents. My grandfather started driving a truck 17 cents an hour. My grandmother worked in a department store making I guess it was like $1 an hour. And when they retired, they were making decent money with decent benefits and a decent retirement package. Every job, and it doesn't matter what it is, could be a good job if it were a union job. Just my thought.
You're absolutely correct. And by the way, the dignity of working with your hands, everybody who's listening should understand how important that is. You don't have to be a PhD from Oxford to be successful. You can be a truck driver, you can be a policeman, or you can be an electrician and be damn proud of what you do.
Yep. Good stuff, Congressman. I appreciate the time. We'd love to have you come back again real soon.
Look forward to it.
Good
Thank
stuff.
you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Donald Norcross. You want to check out his website? We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Desperate measures we explore, marching on the Capitol to lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out, "Where's our government?" Lawsuits and arraignments, members of the party. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money, we will talk for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations. It's next. One day longer. One day longer. The people's
Your
voice is
working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
It is for this reason that I must tell those who fail to report for duty this morning they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
Whatever happened to America? She was sold 26 long years ago. Give all the door, we are jumping off the rails. Any hope of Parmesan sales? Hurry up on to make us sing of good things left behind and raise a glass to better times.
Oh, yes. Raise a glass to better times. I go back to, just a short period of time after the Patco strike. And what's ironic is the Patco union actually endorsed Ronald Reagan because during the campaign, he told them directly, and this is the story that, virtually everyone on both sides tells. He basically told them that their concerns were valid, they would address them, and he did nothing. So that when they went out on strike, for a number of reasons, one of them being the antiquated equipment on which they were keeping the air safe, if you will, wasn't being updated. The stress levels were just through the roof, and nothing was being done. And the union was finally backed into this position where, look, today is one of those interesting moments because we're going to be returning to a lot of those horrible conditions because workers aren't going to have the ability really to move forward. Their unions are going to be defunded, and this isn't the last attack. The Janus case is not the last. The next one is going to be dues checkoff, or what they deceptively call paycheck protection. The next one after that is going to be yearly recertifications and opting in. We know what's coming. It's just a matter of when will the working class of this country wake up to what's been going on for the last 40 years, well, actually since the beginning of time, in this war between capital and labor. And I would argue that the post-World War II era up until the early 80s was kind of an outlier in history, in that workers shared in the wealth that they created. Their lives were getting better. Life was not brutish and short, and that there was opportunity. That's all being destroyed here. And we're going to end up going back to the days like Patco and not having any recourse about it. That strike while all of those people did lose their jobs and all of them were barred from federal employment forever. I mean, you want to talk about punitive, you want to talk about an administration that really stuck it into the back of someone who stood next to them. What they did to the Patco workers is it's a crying shame. But here's the thing. All of those concerns were then addressed by the next, for the next people. So they made the jobs better. And I argued even back then as a kid going, why isn't everyone enraged by what's going on here? So I'm expecting something over the summer. I don't know what, but there's got to be a response. I mean, you look at West Virginia right now, there's a general strike going on as we speak because teachers have said, you know what, we've had enough. And maybe that's the future. Maybe the future is working people saying, collectively standing together and saying, the laws are broken. There's no laws that protect us. Labor peace is over. We're shutting things down. Maybe we're going back to the days of occupying factories and occupying workplaces. I don't know. Maybe we're going back to the days where there's going to be chaos and clashes in the streets. I don't know. But this seems to be what the wealth class of this country wants. They want desperation. They want poverty for their workers, and they want massive profits and control. Or at least that's the way it appears. Because every one of these so-called workplace freedom initiatives that they push is not about freedom for workers. It's a freedom for the employer class to make more and to have more power and consolidate more power into their hands. And it's only going to get worse. Sad times ahead, folks. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Any questions, comments, love to hear it. If you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break for those who only hear the program hour one. Head on over to thericksmithshow.com. Everyone else, right back after this. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1972, marking the day of the Buffalo Creek flood in West Virginia. The Pittston Coal Company's waste impoundment dam failed during heavy rain, causing more than 130 million gallons of water and coal waste to flood the valley below. Shirley Markham of Lundale described what happened. The only warning we had was just a woman neighbor who spotted it and pulled in front of our house and hollered, "Run! The dam has broken!" The flood killed 125 people, including whole families. 7 bodies, 6 of them children, were never found. The flood caused some $50 million in damage and 4,000 residents lost their homes. Government officials suggested building 750 units of public housing for those affected. Only 17 homes and 90 apartments were ever built. The Pittston Coal Company declared the disaster an act of God. 3 separate investigating commissions disagreed and found the coal company responsible. They found that the Pittston Coal Company had disregarded safety practices. Even though the company was to blame for the disaster, they never faced criminal charges, and no one served a day behind bars for what the Citizens Commission concluded was murdering of at least 124 men, women, and children. The company did eventually settle its lawsuits. After legal fees, each family impacted by the flood received a meager $13,000. One positive result of the disaster was that West Virginia implemented stricter regulations and inspections of coal dams in the state. This song, Black Water, commemorates the Buffalo Creek flood of 1972.
Coal company said God is to blame. They built the dam, but he brought the rain. Truth was known throughout the land. Never to trust a company man.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Since a prehistoric
ages, and the days of ancient Greece, on down to the Middle Ages. Planet Earth kept going through changes, and then the Renaissance came, and times continue to change. Nothing stayed the same, but there were always renegades, like Chief Sitting Bull, Tom Paine, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. They were renegades of their time.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. One of my favorite tweets of the day. Dana Loesch, the spokeswoman for the NRA, she tweeted out that the NRA isn't a lobby group. It's a fellowship organization of gun owners. She goes on to chide the person who called her out on being a gun lobby organization. She says, I can't take you seriously on any level now that you've demonstrated you don't know anything about the group you're smearing. Enjoy your day. And I'm going, wait a second. It's a lobby group. And I know that they've got a lobbying arm, but understand the NRA is a lobby group. They do tons of lobbying. And I know you could technically say that, well, you know, not necessarily. They've got this other organization in the same building, has a different office door. So the door is kind of the wall of the door of separation, since we don't believe in walls of separation. It's the door of separation. Oh, we are so screwed as a society. And you know what? The sad thing is we're kind of screwed as a society when you start listening to some of the governors that are crazy, like the Kentucky governor, Matt Bevin, who actually I thought, during the, the governor's time with the president today, actually I thought was onto something. He said, now look, there's part of it that's, all of the heaped in the video game nonsense and all that. But he did talk a little bit about, the use of drugging our kids. He said this culture of death is becoming pervasive. If not addressed by all of the imperfect people in this room with a sense of purpose and a sense of aspiration, I think we are going to see a continued trajectory that's not good. Yeah, no kidding. That's a pretty easy prediction to make. And, look, I'm expecting, unfortunately, another crazy person with an AR-15 to go off shooting something anytime now. He goes on to say there have always been guns in homes and fewer rules. I would argue that's probably true, but those guns had 2 shots in them or 6 shots in them. You didn't have bump stocks. You didn't have military weapons in people's homes, and those were usually confiscated. Just kind of thought I'd throw that out there. He says it isn't to say that these rules and restrictions are necessarily bad, but what has changed is the way we do or do not to do with relates to acknowledging the value and dignity of every human life. I'm not buying that. When you couple with the number of psychiatric drugs that are increasingly systemic and have very severe warnings associated with them related to depression and suicidal thoughts, you put these things in a mess, and no one among us is bold enough or willing enough to step up and challenge the challenge of the facts with that this is a problem. He then called on Trump and the fellow governors there in the meeting to seize this opportunity and call all of us to higher actions related to mores and all that nonsense. I do think there's a problem with giving these kids so many drugs. I do think that having access with all of these guns to people who have all of these drugs, probably a bad idea. And again, it comes back to the guns. Sorry, I'm not buying any of the other arguments, although we heard a lot of them today when Trump met with the governors. And I think one of the best moments, the one that's everywhere all over the news today, is the one with Washington Governor Jay Inslee, who said, I've been listening to biology teachers and they don't want to be armed at any percentage, in response to Donald Trump saying that 20% of teachers he thinks want to be armed. Inslee says, I've listened to first grade teachers who don't want to be pistol packing first grade teachers. I've listened to law enforcement who have said that they don't want to train teachers. Educators should educate, and they should not be foisted upon them this responsibility of packing heat in first grade classes. Inslee ended his remarks by saying, so I suggest we need a little less tweeting here and a little more listening. And I just suggest that we take the Trump's proposal of everyone having a gun off the table and move forward. And look, the reality is arming teachers is a bad idea. And it's not because that, maybe they would rush into an active shooter situation. Maybe they would. Look, there were deputies around there. And now we find out, I guess there were 4 of them. They didn't go rushing right in, and they're trained to do this. I don't think you're going to get many first grade teachers or many chemistry teachers who want this. Maybe, though, it's possible, and I'm not saying that it wouldn't. Maybe by having, every teacher in the classroom having a gun might slow down a gunman to where only a few people died. The question then becomes on the other side of this is, for every action, there's a reaction. The old cause and effect. Okay, so we're putting the guns in the classroom because we want to stop mass shootings, which fortunately don't happen as often, but they are deadly when they do happen. We see everyday gun fails all across this country. In fact, there's a guy on Twitter who I follow who every day he's got a couple of them that never get reported by the news. Someone at a diner dropped a gun and shot the waitress in the behind. Something. Do we want that in our classrooms? Do we want to have the AR-15 hanging up on the wall next to my kid's art? Because you've got, Dana Loesch and the NRA saying that, well, those guns, those could be in the classrooms helping to protect our kids, and you want to ban them. Yes, I want to ban them. The reality is all of those assault weapons should be gone. And I got a really great series of emails today from a guy named Bruce. And Bruce laid out probably what I think is a must-read for every person who doesn't know anything about guns, but yet says, hey, they'd be great in the classroom. He goes through the bullets used by in the AR-15 and how back in the 1964, they were all made for the U.S. military, as was the AR-15. It's a semi-automatic version of the M16. But these bullets were made specifically to do maximum damage. And, what he pointed out in his email to me is, had Gabby Giffords been shot in the head with an AR-15 instead of a semi-automatic pistol, she wouldn't have a head. So the semi-automatic pistol, she lived through a gunshot to the head. It was a long road back, but she lived. With one of these, he claims it'd take her head right off. Because these rounds were made specifically to do as much damage as possible. They were made to kill people because that's what they were for. They were for the U.S. military. These weapons were not ever made for civilian consumption. And yet, thanks to the NRA and our gun nut friends who think that, I don't know what the hell they think, to be honest with you. I've yet to have anyone give me a cogent argument on the thinking of a nutcase who's going to go, yep, got to have automatic, we need these things with the bump stocks and all of that. Because the NRA is against any of it. They're against any bit of sanity. And even today, you had Trump saying that they were going to be gone. The bump stocks, gone, don't worry about it. Forget about it, they're out of here. And yet the NRA is going, what? No, they're not. They're not going anywhere. He said, quote, it's gone. Just don't worry about it. It's gone. Essentially gone. Because we're going to make it so tough that they're not going to want, that they're not going to be able to get them. Nobody's going to want them anyway. And he goes on this bizarre statement about, how the bump stocks shoot really, really, really fast, but they're inaccurate. And anybody who wants to shoot accurately, they're not going to want one. And I'm going, but dum-dum, if you're shooting at a large crowd of people, aim is not really all that important. You just go over there and spray of bullets got to hit somebody. That's the point. And, the reality is even he knows it's not a good thing to have. And yet the NRA and the Republicans are going to stand in the way. But I got to be honest, today's press conference, or not press conference, question and answering session with some of the governors was really quite enlightening. He went on and a whole bunch of rambling stuff. But he said he got to watch some of the deputies performing this weekend, and he said they weren't exactly Medal of Honor winners. No, these are people who were following protocol. They were setting up a perimeter. They were doing what cops do. They just weren't rushing in the front door. And I said this from the beginning. You're not going to get Rambo rushing in without knowing where anyone is. And of course, he uses the guy's name. And, you go, really? We're going to have the president of the United States pick out one guy? He goes, look at Peterson. Look at what he did in Broward, where he thought he was probably a brave guy, but he wasn't a brave guy under pressure. He choked, and other people choked. A lot of people choked in that case. And President Bone Spurs goes on to say that he would have dashed right in, even if he didn't have a weapon. He had a rubber band and a paper clip. He'd have been there, which is easy to say from a mile away. Now he goes on to the whole thing. We're going to make it voluntary. We're going to give $1,000 to the teacher. And he said that, the press, the media, the fake media, that the press covered it and said the headline wants Trump to, all teachers to have guns. Trump said, Trump wants to have guns. He said, quote, I don't want teachers to have guns. I want highly trained people that have a natural talent, like hitting a baseball or hitting a golf ball or putting, because they're exactly the same. He goes on to say, how come some people always make a 4-footer and some people under pressure can't even take their clubs back? Even when he's not playing golf, he's thinking in terms of golf, because it's exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. And, I keep coming back to this idea of having guns in the classroom. Do you want an AR-15 there? Sadly, only half the country oppose the idea. 44% think it's a good idea. This is another one of those issues where it has been framed so simplistically. It has been framed in such a way that it's the good guy in the classroom will have a gun, without actually understanding that accidents happen every single day. And do you want little Johnny or Susie to be the one next? But here's the weird thing. I mean, you look at some of the headlines. The headline over at the Daily Beast, saying the Trump team, GOP House will fall in line on guns. And yet the first thing that we understand is good luck, because the Republicans want to move the unauthorized top priority, which is everyone to carry guns all across the country, and there to be reciprocity, and no state can say no to any gun owner from another state. And you go, but the Democrats aren't going to go for that. And Trump doesn't know what he means. Basically, the Republican Party is, their NRA masters are saying, you shalleth be doneth. I just look at this. And again, I come back to, there's got to be a sane, rational reason. There's got to be a way forward in this. And for me, the way forward is you ban these damn guns. That's it. Raising the age, maybe going to help a little bit, not much. Maybe ban the bullets somewhere. I like what Bruce had to say, though, about the buyback program. He points out that some of the same bullets used by these AR-15s are the same ones our military uses. And some of these guns are, and all of this stuff, stuff our military uses, our law enforcement uses. That you could take some of our military and law enforcement budget, which I guess is somewhere around $700 billion a year, and you could buy some of it back. And you wouldn't actually have to buy it because you're buying it back. And it wouldn't be any different. You just wouldn't be buying it from the company. And that law enforcement and the military would have what they need. And we would take it back from society. Now, I know there would be, the right-wing crazies would lose their minds. The NRA would spasm, all of that. But at some point, I'm sorry, your right to have a murder machine isn't as important as my right to have my kids come home from school every day. That just seems sane and rational. And his idea, Bruce's idea on how you ban these things is a mandatory 25-year prison sentence for possession. At some point, you have to be absolutely, positively in the ban category, and you have to hold these people accountable. Now, what's interesting to me is that there's this, Trump also said something that caught my attention today. It kind of scared the hell out of me. He wants to give the police departments all of the old military gear. Trump said that every time I go to one of your cities, they come up to me, the police, and they say, "Thank you so much for that equipment. We feel much safer." When they can go in an armored van and to a site and not worry about being shot. And look, I don't want our policemen to be shot either. I just don't want tanks rolling down the road. I don't want the normalization of military on our street corners. Too much, too soon, too far. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do we do on the gun issue? Where do we go? How do we solve it? Or do we throw up our hands and go, nothing we can do? It appears that the throw up the hands is probably where we're going to end up with lots of verbiage. Quick break, right back.
Believe that God wants me to give my money to someone like you. But I do believe in what a crazy man can do.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That was the day the Battle at Bethlehem began. 14,000 workers at Bethlehem Steel's Lackawanna Mill in Buffalo, New York, walked out on strike. The Steelworkers Organizing Committee, or SWOC, had been fighting to organize Little Steel for years. Little Steel was a general term that referred to the smaller mills like Republic, Inland, Bethlehem, and Youngstown Sheet and Tube. At Bethlehem, SWOC was still waiting for a decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals about the company union Bethlehem refused to give up in defiance of the Wagner Act. As a defense industry, Bethlehem had $1.5 billion worth of armament orders to fill, and yet they wouldn't even pay the legal minimum wage mandated for government contracts. Retired steelworker Mitchell Schaefer recalled in a 1991 interview, "I went to work there in the late 30s, swinging a 20-pound sledgehammer to break iron billets." The 81-year-old continued by saying, "I got 40 cents an hour, 6 days a week, no vacations." The last straw came when Bethlehem fired over 1,000 workers. Bethlehem claimed these particular workers damaged coke ovens when they engaged in a work stoppage. Workers immediately formed solid picket lines at 7 gates that stretched 2 miles. They successfully beat back attempts by police to allow scabs to cross their picket line. After 38 hours, Bethlehem quickly agreed to reinstate the 1,000 workers. They soon resumed talks regarding wage increases, grievance procedures, and union recognition. But a month later, Bethlehem decided to go back on their promises. They started organizing elections for collective bargaining representatives through their company union. The stage was set for the next big strike at Bethlehem in March that would finally win union recognition.
It's not enough. Whatever you give, a little bit more.
So some good news, I think. 538 pointed out on Friday that according to the qualitative analysis by the groups Cook Political Report, Sabato's Crystal Ball, and Inside Elections, they're saying that only 8 Republican governorships are considered completely safe. Only 8. That means 18 Republican-held governorships are in some degree of danger. That there's a possibility that this November we could completely flip the direction of this country. Completely take over state houses, completely take over governors' mansions, completely take over the House of Representatives, take over the U.S. Senate. There is a possibility. If there is the blue wave that everyone hopes is coming, that I hope is coming, if the Democrats don't shoot themselves in the behind, there's the possibility of turning this country in the right direction. And as I was thinking about this earlier today, because what's frustrated me is that the conservatives have played this game much better than the liberals have. The Republicans have played this much better than the Democrats have. The wealth class has played this much better than the working class, because these are the divides. I know there are some working class Republicans, and I don't know why. Outside of the social issues, they're either homophobic or the abortion issue, or racist, or down those lines. I can't find a working class conservative who can tell me that my life would be so much better if it were the 1880s. So I look at how this has been played out, and there have only been a handful of times over the last 50 years where Democrats have had absolute control to be able to do what they've wanted to. And they've failed to take advantage of those. Even at times when they had, Republican help. This could be one of those moments. This could be one of those opportunities for Democrats to actually come up with a vision on where we're going as a country. The story I woke up to this morning, that was emailed to me, said, the headline, it was a Bloomberg story, and a Washington Post story. It said the companies reveal gigantic CEO to worker pay ratios. Some worry how low-paid workers might take the news. That's the headline. And it goes into how, thanks to the Obama administration, all these big companies now in their shareholder reporting have to say what the CEOs pay compared to the average workers' pay is. They actually have to put a number to it now. And what the companies are afraid of is that their workers are going to find out that they're being paid peanuts, and that their labor is funding the lavish lifestyles of the executives. And it's supposed to be able to tell shareholders, hey, this is how much you're paying your CEO. This is the difference. And for you conscious shareholders who care about such things, you can choose to invest elsewhere. Now, understand, most institutional investors, they don't care. In fact, what they would like to see is a much larger CEO to worker ratio, because then that means the workers are making peanuts or just the shells. They don't actually get the nuts. Some of the interesting things that have come out, and there have only been a handful of companies who have done it so far. Reporting season's coming up, and here we are. But right now, they're all pointing at Honeywell, the industrial giant, who evidently has a 331-to-1 pay ratio. There's this pharmaceutical company, Teva Pharmaceuticals. They are an Israeli-based genetic pharmaceutical company. Theirs is 302-to-1. Now you have this regional bank, Mbakwa Holdings, 55-to-1. So you would go, okay, you want to invest in someone who's paying 333-to-1 or 55-to-1. Understand, back in the 1960s, it was 20-to-1. Going into the 80s, it was like 35-to-1. Reagan forward, we're talking mass explosion in executive pay. Massive explosion. And what these companies are now, what the article was about, is these companies are now thinking, well, we maybe we should be worried that the workers are going to be upset. And some of the consultants are saying, no, don't worry about it. As long as the economy's doing well, those dumb schlubs, they're not going to know any better. But hey, if things turn south, there could be a problem, which is why right now Republicans are working to destroy that. Because again, we want to go back to being blissfully ignorant. And by blissfully ignorant, not knowing that the CEO is making 333 times what the average worker is making. Now, why is this important? On this day, well, you had the Janus case heard today. Another attack on union organizing, on unions. In the old days, companies had to sit down across from the union, open up their books and go, here's what we made, here's what we paid, here's what we have available. And they would negotiate based on the wealth that their workers created and how much of that they wanted for their workers. Because understand, up until the middle 70s, as productivity rose and company profits went up, workers' wages went up with it. And they were almost hand in hand. They walked right up at a nice 45-degree angle. Sometime around mid to late 1970s, productivity kept going up at a 45-degree angle, and wages died. And I argue a big part of that is the war on workers, the beginnings of the assault on unionized workers and unions in general. And you look during the 80s, the numbers dip. Wages actually went down in the 1980s. And I tell the story all the time. Look, when I started working my first real full-time job, I was making $15 an hour throwing boxes on a shipping dock, with if you worked enough hours, with a health care credit and a pension credit. And you go, what are they making today? Well, the same job, basically the same company, same contract, $14 an hour, no health care, no pension. Top rate of $18 an hour. Whereas 30 years ago, the top rate was $18.60, $18.80, something like that. With full, complete, total health care and pensions. All of that stuff's been eviscerated. And I'm not talking economic gimmickry or anything, any shenanigans. It just is what it is. And you look at this and you go, this is the reason that the wealth class is using the Supreme Court to help destroy organizing. Because at some point we look at 333 to 1 and we get angry and say, look at these deadbeats that we're carrying along with us. Which is why these elections matter so much. The other important thing that happened today that didn't get really any coverage whatsoever, and this is a good on the Trump National Labor Relations Board. I don't know that we talked about this back in December, but there was an NLRB case that was being heard and being rushed through right around Christmas time. Merry Christmas. This high brand industrial contractors case where it was going to overturn the Browning-Ferris Industries, the BFI decision of the Obama NLRB, which was simply, and I know these are all kind of bizarre terms and all that, but what the Obama NLRB said is, look, companies like McDonald's, who use a lot of franchises, McDonald's makes you wear the uniform and conform to their entire operation. The average everyday working person, the average sane, rational person walks into any McDonald's across this country, and oddly enough, they're all the same, right? The employees wear the same kind of outfits, the food's all the same, the service is all the same, the motions are all the same. It's all the same. Yet, virtually every McDonald's you walk into is owned by somebody different. So the building looks the same, the food's the same, the workers are doing the same job, they're wearing the same clothes, they're abiding by the same rules, they're using the same damn script, and yet they all work for different people, which gives them the ability to really be insulated from being organized. Because if you wanted to organize all the McDonald's, you would have to go to 25,000 different buildings across the U.S. and organize each one individually, as opposed to saying they all are McDonald's and they should all be organized under one contract, which is how it should be, but that's not how the law sees it, because we have a franchise model. And what Browning-Ferris said is, if you have some control over your workforce, and it's real simple, if you exercise indirect control over the workforce, you're considered a joint employer. Now, what this decision back in December would have done, the High Brand decision, is undo that. Say that, nope, no more, that's out the window. you have to exercise direct control of the workforce to be considered a joint employer. Today, what happened is, oddly enough, one of the NLRB members who decided the casting the third vote in the 3-2 decision to make High Brands the new decision over the Browning-Ferris case, evidently he worked for a law firm that not only represented the staffing company of Browning-Ferris, but evidently was involved in the High Brand case. Even this NLRB, even the Trump NLRB, it appears, saw that there was a conflict of interest. And that even they go, this is a bridge too far for us. We're going to pull back this decision. So as of right now, as of this moment, until they can bring the next case to do it the right way of ramming something through, the law of the land is what the Obama era decision was, which is the Browning-Ferris or BFI decision, which means that it's back to the standard of if an employer has indirect control, meaning that they set the uniforms, the mechanisms, all that stuff, like McDonald's, like FedEx, for instance, all of the FedEx drivers who come to your house, they're all misclassified as independent contractors, or they work for a third-party logistics company. They don't actually work for FedEx, but they have to wear the uniform, slap the name on the truck. They have to be answerable when things get there and all of that. But hey, they're their own boss. They would be considered under the BFI case as employees, and FedEx would be held liable as a joint employer. That is a huge, huge thing. Now, what the right wing is screaming about is that this is going to overthrow and undo the franchise model. It's going to upend it. And I go, good. I think it's what we should do. I have a whole bunch of problems with the franchise model. One, I don't want a McDonald's or an Applebee's or a Chili's or you name the franchise on every freaking corner. I would like a little diversity. Homogeny is not my thing. I would like every one of those entrepreneurs to start their own businesses instead of Applebee's. Let's have Cherry Bees or something else. The other part of this is about crushing working conditions. And that's where, again, this decision, good on them for at least having the sense to say that it stinks all the way through. But the next decision is coming. And I'm sure that they are working diligently to find the next case to be able to overturn the Obama-era BFI decision. So for now, it is what it is. And here's the problem. When you have this kind of wide swings, and this is one of those cases where there's got to be some legislative solution here. There's got to be some reform to our labor law. To have these kind of, during the Obama terms, it's way over here. During the Trump terms, it's way over here. And if we get another Democrat, it goes back. We get another Republican, it goes back. These wide swifts, the pendulum swinging to the extremes is not good, not just for workers, but not good for business. It's not good for the country at all. And this kind of political chaos, at some point, you and I, the voting people, have to stop. We have to stop electing crazy people. There's a good place to start. Let's pledge to not elect crazy people. Problem solved. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Bills are creeping through the door. It's desperate times, so desperate measures we explore. Marching on the Capitol to lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out. Lawsuits and arraignments. Members under company surveillance. Public divided. Either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money. We work hard for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations. It's next. One day longer. One day longer. The people's
Your
voice is
working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Breaking news. Trump and company are a murderous mob. Specifically, they've been serial killers of the English language. The word fact was their first victim, assassinated last year by one of Trump's mobsters who poisoned it with a toxic substance named alternative fact. Their latest hit was a celebrated word from the literary world, satire. It embodies the artful use of sarcasm and ridicule to expose the vanity and vice of public figures. But Trump himself killed satire by starving it of any meaning. How can anyone satirize a presidency that is, in reality, nothing but a fully staged satire of vanity and vice? Satire involves exaggerating the flaws, mannerisms, etc. of various characters to convey how corrupt and contemptible they are. But it's impossible to exaggerate the awfulness of an administration that gleefully flaunts its awfulness every day. Take Trump's proposed budget. Please. Delivered just in time for Valentine's Day, it's a stab to the heart of poor people, intentionally increasing poverty and hunger across our country. It would slash programs providing essential food, housing, and even heating assistance for about 50 million Americans, mostly children, old folks, poverty wage workers, and disabled people. Then there's Medicare and Medicaid, which most working-class Americans count on. Candidate Trump promised us that, quote, there will be no cuts in funding for these programs. But his Valentine budget features, guess what, hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. Not only has his cynicism killed satire, but his cynical health care cuts could also kill you. This is Jim Hightower saying, presidential budgets aren't just numbers, they're statements of a president's moral principles. No work of satire could ridicule Trump's morality as effectively as his own budget.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.com.